All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Robert. I work at Preset. We're going to talk about me in a second. I'm joined today by Brett Roberts from Dremio, and we are going to have a great time. So the topic today is high performance data lake visualization with Dremio and Superset. So just a little bit about myself for those who maybe haven't met me or don't know about me. I hang out in the Superset community and other sort of like data focused communities. I'm a data engineer. I'm also a developer advocate at Preset. My background is like in scientific research in a variety of different fields and software development related to that research and data engineering. And at Preset, I'm working primarily on like open source data stacks for various different purposes. And I do a bit of writing and a bit of talking, and I'm really happy to be here. Also, in general, I'm kind of like an architecture and I would say like a data best practices nerd. Like I get really sucked into ideas about data architectures. So I'm really excited to be here today and to be talking with Brett about Dremio because it fits into that whole picture. Brett, do you want to take a second to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me be a part of this chat today and part of the community. I thoroughly enjoyed it, Rob, everything we've done leading up to this. And I love to see that you're an architecture and best practices nerd because I am very passionate about that myself. So a little bit about me. I am a partner solutions architect with Dremio. I've been with the company for a little bit over 3 months now. And we'll talk a little bit about what Dremio is and kind of our origins in a second. Just a couple things. So I was in the Army prior to joining technology and becoming a technologist. I like to ski, scuba dive. I have if you notice this huge mic that sometimes I just will move around a little bit. I host a podcast with myself and a few other technologists called Big Data Beards. We all have beards. We like big data. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a beard to like big data or even participate in the podcast. We just do an excuse for us to keep our beards, not have to shave. So we like to explore a lot of the trends and technologies that go on in the AI and data analytics space. And then just lastly, I do like to build my own smart home stuff. So everything, my house has been smartified, so to speak. And you can see here just kind of an example of one of the dashboards I built with all the do-it-yourself stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. Yeah, I see that your introduction slide is significantly richer than mine in terms of information. I need to like do something about that longer term. But
well, you talked a lot more about professional things, and I just have my dog and a beard and me underwater. So a little bit of a different thing there.
Yeah. Okay. So the agenda today, what are we going to do? First, we're going to talk about what is Dremio, what problems does it solve, how does it work? And then Brett is going to like show us the interface of Dremio and talk a little bit about configuring Dremio. And then he's going to pass it over to me. I'm going to talk about connecting Dremio to Superset and then exploring a data lake with Apache Superset through Dremio and some kind of best practices and ideas around that. So feel free to ask questions as they come up. We have Srini here who will be answering questions, and also we're going to do QA at the end too. So and I think we have like a small group and plenty of time today. So if there's any like deeper questions, we'd be happy to like at least hear them, maybe even answer them depending on what the question is. Yeah. So I'm going to pass it over to Brett and we're going to learn a little bit about Dremio. I'm going to stop sharing and Brett's going to start sharing his screen and off we go.
All right. Just let me know when you can see my screen.
Looks good to me.
All right. So we're going to come to the demo in a few minutes, but first we're going to start off. I'm just too excited to get into the demo, to be honest with you. But we've got a couple slides just to give an overview about Dremio. So for those of you who have not heard about Dremio in the past or leading up to this conversation, just a little bit about us as a company. We've raised over 200 million in 2020 and achieved over $1 billion valuation and have achieved a unicorn status, which really at the end of the day, we're well funded, we're investing, we're growing, and we're really helping build and scale technologies within the data lake ecosystem. And we've developed strong partnerships with cloud vendors, on-prem storage providers, BI visualization, data science tools like Preset as well. We have a very wide and broad enterprise customer adoption. We really span all industries and focus on all verticals. We, as you can see from some of the logos here, we really do hit a lot of the major companies within the Fortune 100, 500 and beyond. And then, like I talked about earlier, when we were just kind of leading up to the presentation, really Dremio invests highly and is very passionate about building, developing within the open source community. That's really how we were founded. So Dremio was the creator of Apache Arrow and Apache Arrow Flight. And these are two, or Apache Arrow itself is one of the most successful and widely downloaded open source projects in history. So we get over 20 million downloads per month. And more recently, we are also the creators of Project Nessie, which really does provide Git-like semantics for the data lake. And we're going to be talking a lot about Project Nessie at Subsurface, little pitch for Subsurface, which is the Dremio hosted cloud data lake conference. It's actually happening July 21st and 22nd. So just honestly, it's like less than, or I guess a little bit over 2 weeks from now. I'm going to throw a link in the chat right now. If you're interested, it's a free event. Rob's going to be speaking at it. Rob, would you want to just really quickly just talk about your session at Subsurface?
Sure, yeah, I'm going to be doing a session at Subsurface. The gist of it is basically it's going to be to introduce Dremio users to Superset as a business intelligence and like data analytics option, and also to essentially give like a beefier version of what I'm going to be talking about today in terms of like best practices for working with data lake engines using Superset and some useful tricks around that. Yeah, that's cool. It.
All right, so talked about Dremio, the business, got a little bit more about what we are, where we are within the ecosystem here. Let's talk about the challenge that Dremio solves. And at the end of the day, in this world of digital transformation, or organizations being more data driven in how they approach or how they deal with business, it's trickling down to data teams are being asked to do the impossible, right? Organizations and leaders want to democratize data. They want business analysts, business development, any decision maker, or honestly any employee should be able to have access to data to be able to make better, more accurate, and faster decisions. So this idea of data democratization is really proliferating, and a lot with that, organizations require and demand faster time to value, right? Because at the end of the day, data analytics is all about taking an action and affecting the outcome, and you need to have that faster time. And you also need to be able to, so it's not just performance, but it's also being able to stand up, deploy, and scale your tools as well. And they want all this with that wrapped around enterprise required security and governance. And you would think that today that's getting easier, but in fact, it's getting harder, right? Because data is rapidly increasing. It's growing exponentially. The end users are accelerating. When you think of, if we're democratizing data and more people are requiring access to the data, access requests are increasing rapidly. When I first started working after coming out of the Army, I was building dashboards, and every day I would have to go back to our data teams and say, hey, can you change this report? Can you do this? So a lot of these requests are increasing, and at the end of the day, budgets are flat. Sometimes they're increasing slightly. Sometimes they're even decreasing. So this is really the juxtaposition or challenge that data teams are being asked to do. And when we think of how data architectures are today, or how most organizations structure their data analytics architectures, it's really represented in what we call the pyramid of doom. And if we look at the base of the pyramid here, most organizations have some sort of data lake storage, say whether it's cloud data lake storage or on-prem or a hybrid environment. But that's not the be all end all, or what you need to be able to, again, get the data to the end users that are creating dashboards, creating reports, making decisions. So often in today's world, data teams are being forced to take the data, copy it, perform complex ELT or ETL pipelines and processes, and bring the data into some sort of data warehouse, whether it's cloud or whether it's an on-prem data warehouse. And even then, it's not enough. So then these data teams are actually creating cubes and extraction aggregations of the data so that the end user could actually get a copy or be able to have access. And every time we create that copy, every time we move up this pyramid, we're doing really two things. We're decreasing the scope and the flexibility of the data, right? Every time you make a smaller copy or a subset of the source of truth, the scope, the flexibility, it's decreasing. And we're also increasing security risks. Every time you have multiple copies of the data, that's just yet another copy that could be left somewhere. It might move outside the firewall. It's more copies equal more complexity and more security risks. So with Dremio, what we're doing is by providing a Datalake SQL engine that queries the data directly on the Datalake storage, we're eliminating the need to move data into a data warehouse, create cubes, extracts, or aggregations, create any additional copies, right? We call this the no copy architecture, where we're querying the data directly where that source of truth resides, and then connecting the data to that BI tool or data science tool of choice, allowing users fast and seamless interaction with that data. And with this, we've seen that organizations are, a request that might have taken weeks, months, or a quarter actually takes hours or maybe days at the most. And we have a customer that the executive team was waiting 2 to 3 weeks to getting a report. This is the C-suite for a Fortune 100 company, waiting 2 weeks to get a change in their dashboard. They turn to Dremio and they're getting it instantaneously now. Whenever they have a request, it's getting done in real time. And then just to kind of close before we get into the demo, the other thing that I'm really excited about, we're going to talk a lot about this at Subsurface, but what differs Dremio from some of the other, especially data warehouses, but some of the other tools that are out there, is that we fully embrace this idea of an open data architecture. And really, by open data architecture, what we mean is, if you look here on the left, well, my mouse is super sensitive today. There we go. If you look here on the left, you have your data lake storage, whether it's cloud, on-prem, how it's represented, but how the data is represented is mostly in open source file and table formats. There should be an open source file and table formats, and that allows you to bring your best in breed engine, best in breed tools to the data without having to, again, make copies based on which tool you're going to use, which use case you have. So you leave the data in how it's represented, and you bring the tool to the data, not your data to the tool. And this also allows you to not have vendor lock-in. And with data warehouses, when you kind of use their proprietary formats and proprietary tools, it keeps you from leveraging new tools in the future. And we don't really know what's going to be invented a year, 5 years from now, or what is being used today. And I think, this open data architecture really does align for more flexibility and growth in this ever-changing data analytics ecosystem. So that was a quick tee up on just what Dremio is, what we do, and what challenges we solve. I think now, Rob, let's roll up our proverbial sleeves, because it's summer in Boston, it's hot, and get into the demo. What do you think? Okay.
Oh yeah, let's go is what I said.
Yep.
Muted.
Well,
yeah, okay.
All right, so we are in the Dremio UI, and just really quick, I'm going to show what this home screen is. So at the bottom left here, you have your data lake and external sources connections. So you can see here in this specific instance, we have a connection to an AWS and a sample source. And what you need to do, we are logged in as an admin. So as an admin, I can create connections to various table stores like Blue Catalog or Hive, or different file stores like S3 or ADLS, HDFS. So these are all the different data lake storage connections we can make. And just to kind of hit this at home, anything that has an S3 compatible object store, we can connect to. So whether that's on-prem or that's in the cloud. And then we also connect to a number of external sources. The goal here isn't to leverage Dremio as a full 100% query of databases like Postgres. We can combine, or we can join databases with data in data lake storage. We provide that opportunity. So that's how we create the connections and connect to the storage and to the data. Then up here you have spaces, and this is really how we represent what we call the semantic layer, which again is a differentiator between some of our competitors out there, because we allow users, not just data engineers or data teams, but users, to be able to access Dremio, as we'll show in a minute, and work with data sets that they have role-based access to then prepare the data to be analyzed, visualized, and put into dashboards and reports. So right here we have spaces. Again, as an admin, I can create spaces. So if I wanted to do something like this, I can then specify users. I can put, I think we have a username preset, so which is Rob right here. He can query and he can edit. So we can create those folders here. And then again, we use this to collaborate between teams, users, and groups. And then in the middle here, we have your home space, or your home area, which is purpose built for you as and your user credentials. So this is where you can work on jobs or work on different data sets yourself without having to share or collaborate. So now that we've kind of given a quick overview on kind of the UI, what I wanted to do is, Rob, I'm going to prepare some data for you, get some stuff put together for you to run through Superset.
Sure.
So the data that I think you and I want to use is going to be in AWS today. And let's just look at this connection, look at the details. So for us to create a connection to S3, we had to provide the secret and access key. And then what I did was, for the purpose of this, let's just take a look at that. What do we have in this bucket? So we have a bucket called Modernization Workshop. Okay, interesting. If I actually went into advanced options and removed that whitelist of that bucket, you can see a connection to S3 has all the different buckets that we have. In this case, it's the Dremio FE field team. So I'm going to go back in here. Rob, you don't need access to all those buckets. So for this specific demo, yeah, please don't. But for this specific demo, I'm going to go back in as someone who's setting this up for you. I'm just going to create or whitelist the one bucket that you do need, which is modernization. And then I'm going to make sure that you can query. I don't trust you too much yet. So you can't edit it yet, but you can query it. And I'm going to save that. And we can go back into here and we can see that you now have access to these different data sets. And if we looked into one, we can see this is Parquet. And if we wanted to save this, we can see now, okay, this is all the different records. So anyway, so this is kind of interesting here. Let's go back to the user screen. All right, so we have the data ready for you. We have the connection to the bucket ready for you. We have a folder set up for you, partner demo data set. And then anything additional that we want to save, we can save in here. Let's go ahead and log out. Or one thing I do want to show is, as an admin, this is a Dremio instance in AWS. So you have the ability to elastically scale your engines to handle query demand and query need. So right now we have one executor engine and one coordinator. But if we wanted to add more, we can scale up. We can scale just based on what you need as well. And these are auto stop and auto start. So it does help create a more efficient TCO. All right, so we're going to log out. And now I'm going to pretend that I'm Rob for a second, and I'm going to log in as him. And here we go. So you can see it looks fairly similar. You don't have the Boston weather and ski data. So obviously you don't care as much about the things that I care about in Boston, which makes sense since you're in the Bay Area. But we do still have access to the data lakes that you saw, and we have that access to that modernization workshop here. And you see the different spaces. So let's talk about taxi data. I think that's what we want to do. Dremio has a ability to search the entire catalog of data sets and tables that are that you have access to that are connected to in Dremio. So let's type in taxi. Let's see what comes up. And we have a couple different ones. And let's do this one here. This is NYC Taxi. That's the name of the table. And it's in the partner demo dataset folder. So a couple things here. You can, again, the goal here is preparing the data, getting the data ready, making sure this is the right table to bring the data into your BI visualization tool. So I'm looking at it here and, I struggle. I don't really want miles. Maybe we want to talk kilometers today. Maybe we want to have it in our data set. So with Dremio, you have the ability to do a couple things, right? As you bring data in, if it's not the right type of field, you can convert the data type. So maybe instead of, if there was something that came in as a string, I wanted to turn into an integer, I could do that. You also have the ability to create a calculated field. So instead of miles, I'm going to multiply that by 1.6. I do want to keep miles. I want miles and kilometers. So I'm going to just create a new field, call that KM. I'm going to apply that. And you can see here, what we've done is, again, Dremio isn't copying any of the data. We're not bringing any of the data into Dremio. This is all data that's being queried in an AWS bucket. So what we've done though is we've created what we call a virtual data set, which is really just a SQL query on top of a physical data set. So Dremio stores the metadata of the query connected to that virtual data set. And so whenever you pull that up from your space or from a space that you're working on, it just brings in that query. And you can see here. So if you wanted to edit the query yourself, if you wanted to change things, if you unlike me, you really want to get deep into the SQL, you can do that. Or we offer functionality through the UI as well. So I'm going to go back to, now that we've done this, but real quick, just because I know, Rob, you've built a dashboard already. I'm going to go back to this data set here, and I'm going to open it back up. And I'm going to also look at things like, well, maybe, taxi data is interesting, but maybe my analysis doesn't, taxi data is just one part of the puzzle. Maybe I want to correlate that data against weather data, right? Because maybe we want to be more diagnostic, not just descriptive. So maybe we want to correlate against weather data. So Dremio also offers the ability to create joins. If you, and again, this is an environment that we spun up for the purposes of this demo, but if your organization, if Dremio allows you to, well, they recommend joins for you based on what other users have done, what the data sets are. In this case, you don't have any recommended joins because no one else has created this join before. So we're gonna actually have to do some things by hand. So we're gonna actually go into and we're gonna look to see what data is interesting here. We could do something like NYC weather, which is weather data. We can then, we'll look at doing an inner join by date, pickup date and weather date. And we apply that. And you can again see Dremio wrote the SQL query in the editor. And we now have our taxi data combined with our weather data. Snow, precipitation, this is New York City. So, depending on what time of year, you're probably gonna get a lot more snow and a lot less sun or a lot lower temperatures as well. So that is at a high level Dremio. A couple other things real quick that I do want to show is when we go back into that initial data set that we ran, let's just do a quick count and run that. And you can see that it's taking a little bit of time. Well, I don't like that. I don't like it being slow. So let's log out here. Let's go back into the admin real quick. And let's look at that job. And you can see here that there is a flame here. Well, that means that we have actually applied what we call a reflection to the data, which wasn't applied there. So a reflection really is just a physically optimized representation of the source data. So we create reflections that are either raw or aggregate, and we store them. And so when Dremio kicks off a query on the data lake storage, if there is a reflection that pertains to the query that's being run, Dremio uses an optimizer to determine whether the lowest cost to running the query and then kicks off the query. So if we go back into Dremio as an admin, go into this data set, we look at reflections here, you can see, okay, this reflection is turned on. So we have just turned on the reflection. We can also go into reflections here, make sure that's on, and then under support, make sure that reflections are enabled. So now we should be able to, Rob, you should be able to, when I'm passing this over to you now that the data is ready, you should be able to conduct your queries and your visualizations in Superset with super fast return times.
Sure. Thanks, Brett. That was a really useful demo. I've got some questions. Maybe I'll ask them as I sort of fire things up here. One is like, reflections seem really powerful in terms of accelerating the queries. Are they computed, like, do you turn reflections on for at the data source level and they're just like are automatically aggregated as you query the data, or do you have to like manually specify and configure what reflections are turned on and off?
So you can do both. So you turn reflection on at the data source. So as you create additional virtual data sets or child or children data sets, those go with it. But you can also go back and you can specify, well, for this specific one, I want to change the different fields that are in the reflection, or this specific data set has a reflection that is being run multiple times with a field that's not in the recommended reflection. So I'm going to add that field to it as well. So you can do both. You can get very granular and change it by the actual virtual data set, but they're really based on that physical data set or that source of data.
Yeah, that seems really useful. I have more questions, but I'll save them for the end. Thanks for that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so now we're talking about Apache Superset. I imagine that most folks here are probably familiar with Superset, but just in case, let's go through the numbers really quick. It's a modern open source data visualization and BI solution. Works with almost any SQL speaking data source via SQL Alchemy. So that's one of the things that's best about Superset is that regardless of what your underlying data landscape looks like, you have like a mixed data system where you have a data lake with Dremio running on it, but then you have some like high performance systems that are specialized for like a particular kind of operational data. Like you have some time series database or some kind of like, yeah, you're running Druid or something like that. A Superset can just essentially connect to all of those data sources and you can query across them, and that's super useful. Query caching accelerates queries, minimizes cost when working with large tables in a data lake. Oftentimes, when you're working with like data lake query engines, ultimately, one way or another, the cost of what you're doing scales with the amount and the size of the queries that you're hitting the data lake with. And so minimizing that is really good it's good for minimizing costs, and it's good for like more responsive charts and dashboards. Also, it has a pretty full-featured SQL IDE and something we call Explore mode, which I'll show, which provides a really good vehicle for like working with data lakes. And I'll kind of show you why that is in a second here. So I think we're going to hop over in just 1 second. First, I want to show one last thing, which is the Dremio connection string. So I noticed that some of the official like ASF Superset docs are a little bit out of date in terms of what the Dremio connection strings look like. So I just wanted to like get this up there for everybody to see. This is what it looks like. You got your username, password, IP address that you're running Dremio at, that port number, and then /Dremio $SSL = 1. So we'll let this be a reference for those who are looking to connect Superset to Dremio. This is what it looks like. Okay, so we're gonna hop over to Superset now. I'm running Superset in preset just because it's easy. Each one of these different workspaces is its own isolated Superset instance. So I'm just gonna pop into the old Robert workspace because that's me. And so oftentimes when I'm working with a new data set, like one of the first things that I like to do is go over to the SQL editor and just like start exploring that data set just with some basic queries to see like, how large is it? What do the columns look like? Are there values in the columns that maybe don't make sense or we don't want, right? Especially if you're an analyst, or even if you're like an even more sort of like democratized persona that doesn't necessarily have the ability to go in and mess with the base data. It's really helpful to be able to query the data and also to kind of like manipulate it on a level that like inside the BI environment. So we're going to do that right now really quick. But I'm going to get there through data sets. So I'm going to hit data sets. Here's NYC taxi data from Dremio. So I'm just going to click on this. I've already added it to Superset, which is why you see it here. And so, okay, it's going to take us to Explore, right? Let's go over to the SQL editor. Okay, so one interesting thing that you'll notice here is, and I'll just point this out really quick. Yeah, there's a lot of rows in this data. I'm going to say, let's select, I want the largest passenger count. So this is oftentimes how I begin like data exploration, is just like run some basic queries against the data and get a sense of what the columns look like. This may take a second. Interesting fact, Brett and I did some sort of like testing with Dremio and Superset in the lead up to this demo. And what we found was that the reflections feature, when you're querying a huge table that has a billion rows of data, the reflections feature is like essential. Like it makes such a huge difference. We went from queries that were running for 4 or 5 minutes with reflections turned off to queries that were taking 16, 17, 14 seconds. So the difference there is enormous. And we do have reflections turned on for this data set, and you can really feel that in terms of the query performance. Here you can see that the largest number of passengers that was given a ride by a New York City taxi is 255. that's a lot of passengers to fit into a taxi. And so it has me kind of like wondering a little bit about like, maybe there's some records in here that aren't exactly what we want. So how do we deal with that in Superset without like going to our data engineer and saying like, hey, we need like different looking data? Like how can we deal with that in Superset? Well, there's a couple ways. One way is that we can create what's called a virtual data set. And it's a little bit well hidden, which is sort of why I wanted to show it. So let's say that we wanted to do this. So we could say where, so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna select the rows where passenger count, let's say greater than 0. There's quite a few records where it's 0. And let's say like, say less than 8. Because like fitting more than 8 people and like even if it's like a taxi van seems a little bit unrealistic. So what we could do is we can run this query first. Oh dear. What's going on here?
Put a 0 less than or greater than 0.
Oh, oops. Oh, my bad. Boink.
And just real quick, I do want to reiterate. So this data set is over 1 billion records. It's sitting in cloud data lake storage on the West Coast. So what we're querying right now has not been copied, moved at all from that data lake storage, and it's we're looking at the billion records.
Yeah. So well, what we got here is you can see. All right. So this query runs. We're able to actually get like a more filtered data set. What we could do is we could hit explore, which will basically take this query and move it over into the explore mode, which is where you can actually like put together a chart with the data. What we can do is we can save it as a new virtual data set. So I've already done this. This is one of the ways that you can like try to solve some issues with the data set. Is you can apply some like where conditions to it. You can compute some aggregates. You can compute like you can make some derived columns, and you can save that as a new virtual data set. But that's even less flexible than some of the new stuff that we have in Superset. And I sort of like really want to focus just for the last few minutes we have here on showing that off. So what we could do is save this as a virtual data set through the interface I just showed you. You can see if I go over to data sets that virtual data sets have a little bit of a different look to them. So it says that this one is a virtual data set. And even if we click it, if we click it, it takes us to explore mode. But if we say edit, you can see this is the actual query that underlies the data set. We can edit it. We can see what the columns are. We can specify, what if they're temporal, other things like that. But actually, there's another way to do this, which I really want to demonstrate today. So I already made a dashboard based on this data. Let's just click it and take a look. So as it says over here in this little markdown cell, which I highly recommend using when you make dashboards. Markdown cells are great for providing documentation for people that may not be familiar with your dashboard. Shows data from New York City taxi companies from 2009 to 2014. Underlying data is in Dremio, consists of a single table of over 1 billion rows. And we'll see how dashboard level filters are a really powerful tool for dealing with this much data. So rather than making a virtual data set, what you can do instead is to go over here and basically, well, what you'll see is, so here we are in the dashboard, right? You have this cool little button over here if you have dashboard native filters turned on. So if you're running standalone Superset, you have to turn on dashboard native filters. I believe it's still behind a feature flag. If you're running Superset in preset, all the feature flags and like all the bells and whistles are kind of like running by default. So we don't really have to mess with that. But just so you know, like if you are running a recent release of Superset and that does include dashboard native filters, I believe that there's a feature flag you have to turn on in the config.py file. So just be aware of that. There is some documentation on that out there. And if you reach out to me, I can help you with that too. So I've created some filters here, which allow us to do things like filter by rider count, fare, things like that. And I actually want to like go in and sort of inspect some of these. So if you hit the little edit pencil, you can see, okay, we can make different filters, right? And what these are is that like these filters are surfaced as controls at the dashboard level, but with values that don't make sense, we don't really want to have that be part of our controls. And so you have the ability to pre-filter available values. So you can specify basically conditions. So I'm saying here, hey, the passenger count has to be greater than 0, but less than 8. And then this set of controls that you specify up here acts on these pre-filtered values. So I feel like that's a really important and often overlooked capability that Superset has for like basically dealing with outlying values that like you don't want in the dashboards or that don't make sense for some reason. You can deal with them in dashboard native filters at the dashboard level rather than having to create a virtual data set explicitly and deal with them using SQL queries. So I think this is awesome, especially for analysts who maybe aren't as savvy in SQL and would prefer like a NoSQL or like a minimal SQL way of filtering and manipulating data. These dashboard native filters, I think, provide a really excellent way to do that, especially when you're working with such a large data set. So I've created some controls here, and what you'll see is that as I manipulate these controls, stuff that's just gonna change on the dashboard as we do it. So I have a fares column, which basically shows statistics about fares with changes in percent over whatever the time grain is. So this is shown month over month, essentially. And if you mouse over, it shows you like essentially what month you're looking at. If we change the time grain, it's gonna change all of these charts. For routes, we have kind of a similar thing. I'm using some geospatial visualizations for this that basically show the routes. And what you'll see is that, wow, these pickup locations and drop-off locations sure are everywhere. That's because it's like over 1 billion rides in New York City. But as we change the filters, you'll see that this will change pretty significantly. So let's say like we want any situation where there's 6 or more riders, and we want a fare that's like, let's say like over 150-ish. So we can hit apply on that, and then it'll basically just like recompute all of these guys to reflect these filters, which is really cool. So this is going to take a second. Down here, we have a chart that shows average trip distance, and it's broken down by what the different taxi like vendors are. So there's different taxi companies that are able to do this stuff, and that's basically what this shows. And then down here, we have basically sort of like operational data about payments and riders. So different rider counts, which vendors are providing the most rides by the period that we've selected, payment types, stuff like that. So maybe large groups are more likely to use one particular vendor than another particular vendor. That might be useful data if you're trying to make decisions as a taxi company in New York. And you can see like what the rider count is. All of these charts change to reflect. You can see like for our high fare riders, where are they most likely to be picked up or dropped off? So all of this can be done without really any SQL at all. You can do it all with dashboard native filters at the dashboard level. I think it's an awesome feature. I love it. I want to see more people using it, and I'm happy to answer any questions about it as well. So that's about all I have to show today is like, look, you can make simple dashboards. Dashboard native filters are a really good way of dealing with both like problems in the base data, like dirty base data, but also like I feel like it builds into this concept of data democratization as well, where you want more people to have more control so that they can get better information and make better decisions, whatever their role is inside your organization. And part of that is giving people the ability to actually control what they're seeing at the dashboard level. And I think dashboard native filters are like central to that function. So that's about all I have. We're going to head back over to we're going to head back over here, and I think that's it. I think we're ready to take some questions. So,
Rob, real quick, I just wanted to kind of show from what Dremio was showing as you were changing the filters and changing those fields real quick. So this is if you can see my screen, this is our jobs here. So within Dremio, we can show all of our jobs, and this is the last one right here that kind of did the fare amounts, and you had the passenger count greater than 6. And you can see again on that billion row data set that the duration to return that query was 3 seconds, which again, when you're querying that data, it's pretty fast. And I think that it took longer to just make sure that, again, when we're dealing with a demo that's across country, just getting where Dremio is and where your availability zone is, getting the data to Dremio. But once Dremio got that query, it passed it back in 3 seconds. So super excited about that. The other thing too, so just kind of, I saw a couple of questions in the chat. I wanted to answer one while sharing my screen. So Rob, you talked a little bit. So you had a concern that costs to get started could be high, and based on what you were looking at with AWS EKS, the minimum instance is 4 nodes. So we actually have within AWS a AWS Edition, which really allows you to you don't have to worry about setting up a Kubernetes cluster or any type of containers. It's really, you just go through the marketplace, you you subscribe, and then you can pick the number of instances that you use. So you can do anything from I think it's a R or an M5 large or M5 2X large for a coordinator. And then you can scale in increments of 2 for the executors. So it really, depending on your use case, the number of users, the queries that you're passing, and the number of the queries, you can start small and then you can auto scale. So what's funny is I didn't run any queries prior to this demo, which best practice, I probably should have, because all of my engines are set for auto stop after 30 minutes. So an hour ago when I was playing with it, the engines were on, but the engines got tired and they stopped because there was no activity. Again, to save money, to save costs. So when I ran a query, or the first query that ran, the engines had to spin back up. So if I go into here, you can see now after I ran that query, Dremio spun up more engines. Now I can set the number of engines that I have, right? I can edit this for this purpose. I have 4 medium nodes, which are M2X large, but I can say I just want 2 small nodes. You specify what type the node is when you're setting up the project or you're spinning up the CloudFormation template. But you can start very small. You can say at 30 minutes of no activity, or if this engine isn't needed after 30 minutes of being used, 5 minutes. You can get very granular with how you manage the scale of your environment. That being said, if you are interested in trying Dremio, the beauty of this is that through the marketplace, you can try our community edition for free. You don't have to pay for any software related costs. You obviously have to incur the infrastructure, which again, depending on how much you use it and how you set it up, it could be very minimal with M5X large instances. So Rob, does that answer your question?
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, we're getting a lot of really good questions in Q&A. It looks like the top 2 are from Rob. It seems like you answered the top one. There's a question of I guess you sort of addressed that, right? Startup costs.
Yeah, I would say that, very easily, and I'll put the link to the marketplace in the chat. You can very easily just use the marketplace, spin up the CloudFormation template, use our AWS edition, and then you don't need to worry about, starting with 4 executor engines and scaling from there. You can start with 1 coordinator, and then even with 0 executor engines, and as you kick off your queries, Dremio will auto stop and then auto stop those, auto start and auto stop those.
Okay, we have a pair of really good related questions. I'll take the superset one. Mohammed asks, how do you create a slice chart that takes data from more than 1 table, or what is called data modeling directly in Preset? So the answer to that is through the virtual data set feature. If you have more than 1 table that's in the same data source, you have the ability to basically write a join query and then create a new virtual set out of that join query. So you can do that in Preset, but also it looks like you can do that at the Dremio level as well. And then Alana asks, is it possible to query across different data sources with Dremio, JSON and Excel, for example?
You can. Okay. Yeah, you can. So when you take that physical data set and turn it into or save it as a virtual data set, as you're changing it, you can then join different data types. Again, obviously, cool. You're based on SQL functionality with the type of join. So Nessie's exciting. I can't get too much into Nessie right now. I'll send you a couple. I could put a blog or 2 in there, but I would actually, Rob, encourage you to, if you want to hear more about what we're doing with Nessie and bring that into the community, we're giving some exciting announcements and demos at Subsurface in 2 weeks.
Cool. And then there's a question, it's sort of vague, privacy / masking. So I guess what security options are provided in Dremio in terms of do I have the ability to hide a particular column, or what are my options?
So with that, it's with Dremio Community Edition, you don't have that ability, but with Enterprise Edition, you do. And we do partner with companies out there like Privacera, and we use things like we're a launch partner with like Lake Formation. Right now with Privacera, it's table access only, but we're working on integrating column and row as well.
Cool. So I think that covers Here's one that I really want to see answered. How frequently does the reflection get refreshed from the physical data set?
Yep.
My understanding, yeah, please.
So you can set that parameter. You can say, like, so if it's a static data set, like what we were doing today, you never refresh, never expire. You can set that time for refreshing and time for expire based on how data is brought into your lake.
So here's a question. If you have a reflection that's on top of some base data, if the underlying base data changes, but Dremio is not scheduled to create a new reflection for a certain period of time, and I'm using like a reflected version of that data set, do I have to wait for the reflection to refresh on the timer, or does Dremio know that the base data has been changed and therefore recomputes the reflection?
So right now, based on the frequency of the data, you would just need to shrink the refresh time, but we're working on kind of some of that, getting like almost like a stub, like when the data set is X versus what it was before Dremio auto refreshes. But right now it would just be refreshing through Dremio.
Great.
And I did put a link if you're interested in checking Dremio again, trying it in the marketplace with the community edition. I put that in the chat as well.
Awesome. Well, I think that does it for questions.
There's one more question left, actually. So are Dremio and Preset a unified license or a separate contract between Dremio and Preset? So they're separate right now. We are doing some really awesome and exciting integration work, through our alliance partnership, work on trying to make it more seamless and integrated. But right now they are separate.
Yeah, they're separate services, separate types of technology, really, but they do work very well together, and that's what brings us together today.
Yep.
Also, I have a question that's maybe directed at me. Does Preset support import visualization types from third party? Does anyone provide that? So Superset supports visualization plugins, third-party visualization plugins. Also, it's an open source project. Like, you can actually go in and rip out whatever you want and replace it with whatever else you want. So, but we do have official support for visualization plugins, and you can find a blog on our technical blog that sort of like goes into that. In Preset, we don't really have like explicit support for third-party plugins yet, I don't believe, but I think that I think it is coming soon. In theory, we have this thing called dynamic plugin import in Superset, where you have the ability to like run a visualization plugin in Superset without it actually being in Superset. And I think that's something that we're probably going to bring to Preset at some point as well. So anyway, hopefully that helps with that question. And let's see, we got a couple new messages here. Okay, yeah, Srini's posting some relevant links. Well, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I was just sharing some links. No questions, but yeah. Cool.
Well, thanks everybody. It was a real pleasure. Awesome questions. And yeah, we'll see you around the community. Feel free to reach out to me on the Superset Slack or LinkedIn or just like whatever other channel. I'm happy to take feedback, to hear things that you're doing that are interesting. I just like to learn stuff. And Brett, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to talking with you all in the future. And please reach out to me, Twitter, LinkedIn, email. I'm putting my email in the chat if you have any questions about Dremio or would like to explore it even more.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.